I often have clients that tell me, I just want things to be the way that they were before I even heard of dieting.
Let's talk about exercise and appetite.
If we understand what the body is asking for and actually give it what it wants, but
Mhm.
if we're kind of guessing and going like, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want that? The body's like, no, I don't want that. Try something else. I don't want that. Try something else. That's not what I want either. We get this experience of like, I could just keep eating. And it's like, well, yeah, because the request keeps going unanswered.
When someone's trying to shift their relationship with exercise, they're trying to make it less about how they look, but also it is kind of a bit about how they look. Is there a healthy balance? Is there a point up to which you think, well, yeah, maybe it's okay for that to be a priority up to this point, and then a tipping point where it's not?
The overvaluation of weight and shape, by definition, is believing that our appearance is the most important thing about us. But it's not for me to tell you what you should want. I would experience moments that I thought were happiness, but they weren't happiness as much as they were moments of ego-driven kind of satisfaction. Someone used to say, oh my God, you're in such great shape. Massive difference between genuine fulfillment, genuine joy, genuine peace, and moments of relief or ego-driven satisfaction amidst a life of anxiety.
This is exciting for me because today we're joined by Marcus Kane of Strong Not Starving podcast and YouTube channel. Welcome to YouTube, Marcus. So I'm the therapist. I'm interested in what's going on up here. You're the personal trainer, but I know you're also interested in what's going on up here. So I'm hoping that this bringing together is just going to be what some of my subscribers and viewers are going to want to hear. So welcome, Marcus, and thank you for coming on the channel.
What a lovely introduction, Sarah. Thank you so much.
I'm going to start with a question that may not be relatable for a lot of people watching, but I want to ask you this because it's a question that I receive probably about once a month.
Mhm.
And the question will come from somebody who is bodybuilding. And the question is always, how do I continue bodybuilding and not binge? Because binge eating is a massive problem in the bodybuilding world. And I'll be honest, Marcus, I don't know what to say to these people. So before we talk about exercise in general, I'm going to throw that one at you.
For sure. It's helpful to really acknowledge bodybuilding as a sport. Like, I know that most bodybuilders do consider it a sport, and it might just sound really obvious to anyone who's really in that. But just for context, bodybuilding at that high level, when that is a part of someone's life and lifestyle and goals, it's a sport. It's no different to saying that I'm a competitive like Formula One driver or like, jockey, or I'm a competitive martial artist or something. And this is why sports psychology is specific, that there are things that athletes need to practice getting really good at mentally that the rest of us don't really have to practice quite as much. It's almost like if you want to walk through the door of a high level sport, you're signing an agreement with that sport to take the good and the bad. And part of this is acceptance, going like, look, if I sign up for this experience, if I sign up for this thing, then I'm going to be faced with this particular challenge and it's going to be really hard. There is no way that we can be involved in a sport that involves intentionally changing body composition and not be faced with some really big challenges as far as food and even body image and patterns of disordered eating. I'd say that during periods where calorie restriction in terms of competitive bodybuilding or something like that might be on the cards. We can't eliminate risk of binge eating. We can only do our best to mitigate it. And one of the most important things there is doing our absolute best to make sure that self-care practices in every other area of life are super on point, because what's going on with food is going to stress you out. It's going to suck at certain points. There are no ways around that. It's just going to suck. So this means that surrounding yourself with good people, getting good sleep, making sure that you've got some joy in your life and like other things that you find fulfilling and that your support network is good. These are the things that we really need to lean on during times like that. Because if you're trying to do something that involves taking action that's against the grain of your physiology, and at the same time, your day job is a nightmare, your relationship is a disaster, you're financially stressed, you like, well, it's not gonna just no, like something's gonna give,
Mhm.
in a really big way.
And I appreciate we're talking at the extreme end of things here with something like bodybuilding.
Mm,
But it's, I guess for me, one of the big pieces of the work that I do with people is we look at giving up restriction.
mm,
So when someone's coming to me as a therapist going, how do I pursue bodybuilding without binging? Like for me, it's because the very foundational thing that I would first of all do with someone, it's not an option. It's not available. But one thing that, and it was interesting listening to you because I guess from my perspective, I was going, well, if you're bodybuilding and you binge, that just means that it's not possible. Like your biology is more powerful and all of that. And what you're saying, I think, just made me stop and made me think twice because it also made me think of, say Joe Public, someone in Joe Public is dieting and they feel like they're managing to be in control of their food intake. They're not doing anything extreme, but they're in control. That kind of top-down control creates a certain level of stress, even if
yes.
biologically your body's kind of okay. So what I heard in what you were saying is that well, if you add stress on top of that, like life stress and all of that, that could just be too much to send you over the edge. So many people say they break their diet because they had a bad day, because this happened. So then they think it's only emotional.
Yes, I do my best to work with people wherever they're at. So some people come to me quite ready to put aside restriction. They're like, I know, like, they're not a competitive athlete, competitive bodybuilder, whatever. They may have been dieting way too hard or something. And they come to me and they've already done a little bit of work. They've already dug around in the anti-diet space a little bit. And they're like, look, I'm on board with saying no more to the way I was restricting. I understand that that's not an option for me anymore. I also meet people where they're at who come to me and say, essentially, I got to be honest, I still have goals as far as my physical appearance is concerned. I still have goals that requires certain things of me. It requires a certain level of, let's call it what it is, restriction. And my first message to those people is I would really love for you to feel good about yourself, regardless of, if your window for acceptability with your body was a bit like larger. I would love for you to like love and accept yourself and everything like that with a little bit more wiggle room as far as what you're able to look like. But it's not for me to tell you what you should want. So if this is something that you want, if me telling you that you're a wonderful person and that you don't need to do this and whatever, if that's not enough for you, and you do actually still want to have some targets or have some requirements or whatever in terms of body composition, then again, we can't eliminate the risk of binge eating because restriction by nature does increase the likelihood or increase the risk of binge eating. But we can mitigate things and manage things as best we can if we make sure that all the other areas of your life are really well taken care of. You're communicating well in your relationships. You have a great work-life balance. You feel fulfilled in your job. Like, and this is the thing because for so many people, making the rest of their life, don't know what you'd call it, stable, reliable, solid. Like everyone has ups and downs in their lives. Like, everyone has career stress, work-life balance issues, um, things to navigate within relationships. So most people really struggle to create the kind of life that allows for their window of tolerance in terms of stress to be dedicated purely to dealing with dietary restriction. So, like you said, the stress usually overflows and we end up binging. But that's part of the kind of information that I have for people that say they still have goals. I'm like, well, your self-care in like every other area of your life will need to be banging in order for this to even be remotely possible. And the last thing I'll say about that is like this is where like the example of like cliche example of the Hollywood transformations kind of comes in. If someone has a personal chef that's taking care of all of their food and making everything exactly as it needs to be, they've got someone taking care of their kids, they got a personal assistant, they don't have any financial concerns. All of a sudden, that removes a lot of the pressure that most people have to deal with on a daily basis. So, of course, they're going to be in a position of privilege where they can access the kind of lifestyle that is congruent with looking the way that they do.
Mm.
But is that an option for most people?
Well, it's also making me think of when people talk about a time in their life where their eating was really stable. Maybe they were in a relationship, maybe they were in this great job, and they just had a really great balance in life. And I'll notice, I think the mind will go to, oh, well, back then when I was eating this way, life was great. So in order to make life great again, I need to eat this way because it was the eating this way that can make life feel great. And sometimes the cause and effect, I think, just gets muddled up.
Absolutely. Like 100%. I even have an example of that myself. Like there was a while where I throughout my 20s, I had one foot in the fitness industry, one foot in the music industry, and I'd periodically be touring and traveling to do music industry work. And when I put a stop to that, and I was like, all right, I'm I'm done with that for a while. The lifestyle was killing me. There was a period of time where I was single, working as a personal trainer in Brighton in the UK. I had no responsibilities. I was just single guy, personal trainer, living in my own apartment. I didn't have to factor anybody else into my life at all. I was lonely and sometimes depressed, so I wouldn't choose it again. But at the time, I was magazine cover level, quote, good shape. And it was a product of having no other responsibilities. I could eat what I wanted, when I wanted, train when I wanted, for however long, and I didn't have to factor anything else in. But I've chosen to have a life where I have a marriage and a relationship that's really important to me. I have a business now and a career that requires a lot more of me than just being a personal trainer because I want to create something bigger than just working day to day as a personal trainer. And even those two things alone, I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good partner. I want to be a good coach. I want to be a good like business owner. I want to be, you know, the best musician I can be and stay fulfilled within that part of my life. And it's like the bandwidth to stay in magazine cover level shape is no longer there. So of course, I no longer look exactly the same. And if I was to fall into that trap of saying like, oh, I just need to eat the same way as I was back then, not only would that be not feasible, but even if I was to eat exactly the same way, same outcome wouldn't happen because all the other variables are different.
You heard of the phrase monomania?
No, I haven't.
It's just to be very focused on one thing,
Mm,
like that kind of hyper focus. And the less you have in your life, is in the less different threads of energy that need to go out into different things that matter to you or demands that are being made of you, the more energy you might have to focus into the one thing. And if the one thing becomes fitness or an aesthetic or something like that, you have more energy. And I wonder how you handle this and how you might think about it for other people. But a lot of people are going through a kind of grief because previous points in their life, they've had a body that has either been fitter or looked a certain way. And now they have that different experience of their body. And because they had that, there's that sort of longing of that's the version of me that I should be because I know I can do it because my body has been that before. I just wonder how you speak to that.
that's a really hard experience. Like straight up, it's a really hard experience. We can talk about things like staying big picture focused, which is really important, and remembering what was the reality of your life as a whole, maybe when you looked a particular way. And anyone who's ever looked a certain way, we're talking, leanness, like gym stuff, whatever. The exact word for it escapes me. Like aesthetically desirable. Yeah.
Hmm.
That moment in time, that snapshot then kind of becomes our brain's measuring stick for how we look. And that's a really difficult thing to navigate. We need to be really on point in terms of recognizing the fact that life changes and the overvaluation of weight and shape, by definition, is believing that our appearance is the most important thing about us. It makes sense that part of us looks at how we looked at maybe certain parts of our lives and went, that was kind of cool. Looking that way was kind of cool. But what else was going on? How did the rest of your life look? Would you trade it for the life that you have now? And this is a very individual conversation because some people do genuinely say, yeah, I was genuinely happier then. And it opens up all these kind of Pandora's boxes in terms of like, was it genuine happiness? Or was the anxiety associated with the overvaluation of weight and shape just mitigated during that period of time and giving you the illusion of peace just because there was a kind of lid on that anxiety, whereas everything else in your life may have been much smaller? That's kind of the train of thought and the conversation that comes from this.
And that's making me think of Steph Dodier and what she talks about with it being about safety, that there is
Yeah.
a safety in feeling like you match the societal ideal. There's a kind of social currency that comes along with that as well. So how you feel in yourself is often based on what you're believing, and that feeling of safety, which is can be mistaken for confidence, except that it's so fragile because you're only safe as long as you maintain this. And that's the threat that's always hanging over, so you're going to lose
Yes.
it, especially if you've lost it before.
Oh yeah, I love that. It's like that sword of Damocles just kind of hanging over you perpetually. Like right now you're safe, and that safety is kind of masquerading as confidence.
Hmm.
But that could change at any moment. And the self-approval and security and confidence, it's all very, very conditional.
Hmm.
And that's a very anxious place to be.
Yeah.
The way that I describe it often is like during times of my life when I was consumed by that, I would experience moments that I thought were happiness, but they weren't happiness as much as they were moments of ego-driven kind of satisfaction. It wasn't real joy. It wasn't real happiness. I experienced joy when I'm hanging out with my wife. I experience joy when I take my dog to the park. I experience joy when I'm doing some singing and guitar practice and something I've been working on comes together and I'm like, I just heard a moment. I heard a moment of what I'd like this to sound like all the time. And that one moment makes the rest of it possible. You know, those are very different feelings to the feelings that I would get when someone used to say, "Oh my God, you're in such great shape," or when I do a really conspicuously large tour with a band or something like that, and people were like, "Oh wow, you're doing that thing." Like massive difference between genuine fulfillment, genuine joy, genuine peace, and moments of relief or ego-driven satisfaction amidst a life of anxiety.
Mhm. And so when you're working with your clients, you're working with people who've had this disordered eating background and they're coming to work with you, and your ethos is around let's make aesthetics less important. When we focus on that, that's problematic for a lot of people. But these are people in recovery from disordered eating. So that's there. The desire for the aesthetic doesn't necessarily leave us, even if we choose not to pursue it, let's say. So when someone's coming in and they're trying to shift their relationship with exercise, they're trying to make it less about how they look, but also it is kind of a bit about how they look. Is there a healthy balance? Is there a point up to which you think, well, yeah, maybe it's okay for that to be a priority up to this point and then a tipping point where it's not? Or is it a case of having to be very vigilant about how much you're kind of looking for the aesthetic outcome in terms of how it messes up people's relationship with exercise and movement?
I hope this is an answer to that question, but Something I do is I show all my cards straight away. I don't drip feed people concepts and ideas trying to kind of string them along. Straight out of the gate, I usually say, okay, even if aesthetic change or weight loss, whatever it is important to you, even if that's the goal, it's not my place to say morally whether that's right or wrong. I can ask, is that helping you right now? Is making decisions based around that leading to a positive outcome? Is it is it working out for you? I can ask that question, but then sometimes people will say, well, yeah, because I'm able to manage my weight and everything. Like the rest of their lives might be very small and very anxious. But it's easy to say, okay, yeah, but it is working out for me because it's managing my weight or shape or whatever to a degree. So the more helpful thing that I often bring to everyone's attention is like, if we want to have the best possible outcome, like the best possible likelihood of a sustainably good outcome with aesthetics or body shape, it's in our best interest to make weight and shape not the goal. Sustainable outcomes usually appear when we focus on the training, we focus on the recovery, we focus on making our life bigger than weight and shape. Ironically, when we do that, I found this with myself over the years and with clients. When we make life bigger than the weight on the scales or what we look like in the mirror, and we learn to train in a way that resembles how maybe athletes train, rather than training like, whatever the latest YouTube video on, training fashions or whatever says, the outcomes are better.
I can attest to that personally, in as much as in my binge eating recovery, I've been at a higher weight than I am now. And so my weight came down a bit, not as much as at the time I might have been hoping for, because,
Yeah.
that's still in my head. But by taking the focus off of that, my weight did start to come down.
Yes.
And there were a few times in recovery, though, where I would do this thing where I would stop focusing on weight. My weight would start to come down, but then I'd notice it came down. And then I would start overthinking food decisions again. And so then there might be a bit more binging and compulsive eating again. And so I was doing that for a bit before I really got to a point where I was like, okay, you need to really let this stuff go, because it's one of the reasons why I find it hard when people say, what point did you recover? I don't know, because I sort of would recover and then I'd get kind of pulled off balance a bit, and then I'd find my way back to balance. And that was kind of happening. And so when I was recovering, I wasn't hearing any of this stuff out there on social media, where a lot of practitioners out there are saying, when you recover from binge eating, the likelihood of weight gain is high. Maybe if you're in a smaller body, or you're below your set point weight, or your weight suppressed in some way, or there's been a lot of restriction anyway, even if you're not weight suppressed. Whereas that wasn't the case. But I do wonder, if I'd had that message in my ear, you will gain weight in recovery from binge eating, I wonder how that message or that belief might have actually affected my recovery. As in, would it have become like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Would I have at the time been too afraid to even go there, as I appreciate a lot of people are, because they're being told this is what is going to happen?
Mm.
And then to even talk about this stuff is a bit contradictory, because it almost sounds like, well, if you don't gain weight, that's good, so don't worry about it. And that in itself is inherently fat phobic, right? So
Mm.
these kind of conversations are so nuanced when we're trying to have them and speak to different experiences without saying it's better if you don't gain weight and it's worse if you do, because that's not helpful or true. But a lot of people will feel that way, as in they would prefer not to gain weight because that's just how they feel.
It's an incredibly nuanced conversation and very individual. Each person's experience is slightly different. And something you just said there about noticing that your weight was coming down and then thinking, okay, I'm going to do this on purpose, or, bringing a bit more intention to it. That was that reminded me of an experience that I had in 2022. I had become really pissed off and frustrated with the training program that I was committing to. I let go of, I need to do what feels like enough. And I just followed the maths. Suddenly, everything was working very well. I hit personal bests on all these important lifts. My deadlift was for anyone who's interested in the actual, training outcomes, my deadlift was well over double my body weight. My bench press got up to that 225-pound benchmark. But exactly like you said, you noticed that it was working and you went, oh, okay, I'm going to do this on purpose. I noticed that it was working and thought, oh, cool. Or maybe I can push a bit harder on the next training cycle. Within 2 weeks, I'd screwed up my left shoulder to the point where I'm still trying to come back from that. I'd let go of the outcome and was focusing on something that was genuinely constructive. It was working well. And then I got in my own way and tried to take what was working and just like do it harder, thinking that that would produce a better outcome. And I screwed it. I'm still trying to recover from this shoulder injury. I'm still trying to work my way back to that place, all from thinking that if I tried harder, I would make it better. So wrong.
Yeah. I relate as someone who damaged her feet, gosh, 5, 6 years ago now from running too much.
Mm.
They'll never recover. I've been to
Oh.
podiatrists and the official diagnosis is that my feet are effed.
Oh, that's so frustrating. I feel you. I'm like my background in personal training, I did a bunch of upskilling at different points to work more with rehab training and injury rehabilitation and this kind of thing because I desperately wanted to get out of the weight loss space because it was killing my soul. So I became the guy in any gym that I worked in that would be the injury rehab guy. That if someone was like 5 different kinds of broken and no other trainer wanted to touch them, I'd be like, I can do it. I'll work with you. I can do this. Even with the knowledge that I have on rehab and all that kind of stuff, I'm still troubleshooting issues with this damn shoulder. Like it's hard.
hmm Oh yeah, I've definitely had a few pity parties for myself about that one. Let's talk about exercise and appetite
hmm
because the traditional advice out there, the traditional basic advice is eat less, move more.
hmm
And then there are people out there saying, yeah, but when you move more, you get hungrier.
Mm.
And I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And in terms of what you've seen with your clients, if they talk to you about this, that is, of what happens to their appetite when they're on a training program. Is it that for some people, their appetite doesn't seem to be affected that much by exercise and other people feel more swings in it? What are
Of
you
course.
noticing?
Of course, there's variation from person to person, but in general, if you overtrain, you're going to get hungrier. Like for
But what
multi,
about if you just exercise? Okay, let's bring it to me.
yeah.
So there is a yoga video that I do maybe 3 times a month, this particular one, and it's a core one. And it's only a 20-minute video. And I would say there's probably only about less than 10 minutes of it where it's quite intense, where you're pushing yourself to the point. I'm pushing myself to the point of discomfort. Whenever I do that video, whether I do it in the morning or even whether I do it before I go to bed, either the day, if it's in the morning, or the following day, I am ravenous.
Mm.
And it's like 10 minutes of core work. And for context, I always feel it a bit the next day,
hmm
but the shift in my appetite is so noticeable beyond any other kind of exercise or movement I do. If I went for a 2 hour walk, I wouldn't feel that.
That's really interesting. And we'd be speculating as to why. Like to understand the mechanism behind that hunger in relation to your experience with that particular kind of training or that particular workout would be extremely interesting. I know the textbook answers are that sometimes intense exercise can result in you feeling hungrier. Sometimes more training volume, like doing excessive cardio and that kind of stuff. Like not a little bit of cardio, moderate cardio. Please do your cardio. Um,
If you want to,
if you yeah, if you want to, God,
if you
all
enjoy
the
it and it's joyful
all the
movement and all of that stuff.
if it's joyful movement and if you're doing it for the right reasons and if there's so many disclaimers. But yeah, it makes sense that for certain kinds of physical activity, your hunger could be affected. To dive into, your unique experience of that hunger and the exact mechanism, we could be here a really long time attempting to understand that, and we could still be wrong. But in in general, it's not unusual for certain kinds of exercise to result in feeling a bit hungrier sometimes.
Yeah, it's the bit part because I just feel like my response to this particular one, I could do another yoga workout, which is even more intense. That wouldn't affect me as much as this 10-minute ab.
Well, that's really impressive because can I swear on this on this channel? I do my best not to,
I
but
know,
sometimes it
I never do swear on
okay.
this channel.
I
So,
well I yeah, anytime I do yoga, I'm usually pushing it uphill with a pointed stick.
yeah.
That's the G-rated version of how I would usually say that. Like I struggle with yoga. I find it very difficult. My
Mm.
mobility is okay, but I still struggle with yoga. I think it's the isometrics and that kind of stuff. I'm underqualified to go all psychoanalyst on you, but it the exact mechanism or the exact pathway to that hunger, it could be physical. There could be something psychological or emotional involved in it. You would probably have better insight into yourself and your experience of that hunger, and especially given your professional experience, I'm wondering if you really explore that hunger. I'm sure you've thought of it. I'm sure you've meditated on it for a moment. What do you notice about it?
To me, it almost feels like a hormonal hunger. So if I were to exercise, I would notice I'd feel hungrier and I'd eat a bit more, and that's it. Life goes on. But with this particular one, it doesn't matter how much I eat. It's there like a nagging feeling. And I don't even know, like, because obviously it's in the core as well. So we're talking about a core thing. We've got our digestion and our stomachs down there. So now you got me wondering whether like all kinds of signals or wires might be just getting crossed or something like that.
Can I ask you about the season of your life where you struggled with disordered eating? Were you doing a lot of core work and kind of core training, anything that resembles this program during that season of your life?
So no, I don't think so. My thing used to be running and spin classes. I
Mm,
loved cardio because cardio I found really gave me the mental boost as well. And I found that that would make me hungrier. And I think that did trigger binges because, there were time I was trying to control my food at the same time. What I notice now when I don't very often do like cardio, but if I do push myself more now, let's say I went and did a spin class, if I came back and ate a meal, I would really struggle to find satiety.
mm,
And I noticed this as well when I was running. I did a half marathon 7 odd years ago now. Um, and what the only thing that I found worked was when I finished my run or my spin or whatever it was that I was doing, is to drink a glass of orange juice.
mm.
And I think it was almost something about trying to get the glucose back in the muscles or something. And if I drank a glass of juice, and I didn't drink juice very often, but if I drank that before I ate, then I could feel satisfied with my meal and it felt like enough. If I didn't, I could eat the same amount of energy that would be in the juice in my food, and I couldn't get that feeling of feeling like I had replenished myself.
That speaks to, I know there'd be a lot of people out there who maybe have experimented with low carb diets and find it very difficult to feel satiated when the combination of low carb diets and intense exercise is on the table. I know just as many people who swear that they feel great doing like low carb type approaches while combining that with intense training. I've just got to take their word for it. But it's not an uncommon experience to have that desire for carbohydrate, that desire to be kind of replenished, come up around intense exercise, especially if you're really in tune with your body and really in tune with your needs. Some people might just experience that as just like, oh, I'm just a bit hungrier. But if you're a bit more in tune, you might be like, yeah, I need that. I want that orange juice. That's what I want. And if we understand what the body is asking for and actually give it what it wants, then we can feel satisfied, satiated, whatever you want to call it, kind of quicker. But
Hmm.
if we're trying to give the body, if we're kind of guessing and going like, do you want this? Do you want this? Is this what you want? I don't know. Do you want that? The body's like, no, I don't want that. Try something else. I don't want that. Try something else. That's not what I want either. Give me the goddamn, like, then it can feel like, oh God, I could just keep eating. But, it might not be the case of this bottomless pit of hunger. It's just that we haven't quite identified what the body is asking for or what you're really kind of craving at that point. So again, everyone's experience can be unique and different, but this could be part of it, identifying what the body is asking for. Because sometimes when we miss the mark, when we try to respond to a desire with something that's not the thing that the body is asking for, we get this experience of like, I could just keep eating. And it's like, well, yeah, because the request keeps going unanswered.
It's interesting.
Mm.
So often when somebody's coming out of restrictive eating, particularly if it's been quite significant restriction, the advice is to have an exercise break while the body recovers and you refeed and all of that. And for people coming out of compulsive eating or binge eating or something like that, there doesn't seem to be clear
Mm.
advice about that. What are your thoughts kind of on that side of thing? When somebody is recovering from disordered eating, what are the things that they need to be thinking about when it comes to exercise and what might need to change? Because I talk a lot on my channel about food, how we
Mhm.
think about that. How might they need to, because it's not how they need to think, but what might they need to be asking themselves or considering as they try to navigate this for themselves?
One of the most important questions to ask is, where is the intention with exercise? Like, what is my intention with exercising? Am I moving my body because I enjoy feeling strong? I enjoy moving. It makes me feel mentally clearer. And again, not as a way to mitigate the anxiety associated with compulsions, but do I genuinely feel better mentally, physically when I exercise?
I like that. I just want to repeat that. That question to really kind of invite the viewer to ask themselves that, do I genuinely feel better mentally and physically when I exercise?
Mm.
It feels like that's what it boils down to.
Essentially, because it's like connecting with the intention, because it's very difficult to put blanket rules on whether or not someone should or shouldn't exercise or what kind of exercise they should do in kind of disordered eating recovery, because there might be someone who would really benefit from moving their body, while for others, their relationship might be a bit more compulsive and a bit darker and associated with some more cycles of guilt that really need to be broken. So for that person, there'll be a completely different answer to the person who, it would genuinely help them to maintain a great relationship with movement. So it all depends on the intention. What is the intention with exercise? Like, is exercise there as a way to manage body shape or to compensate for calories consumed? If that's the intention behind the exercise, then we need to look at that and reevaluate it. Going,
But also, I
and
want to add that maybe for some people, that's always going to be there a bit.
and that's
And
the
so to
thing.
know that, like, even if you can't completely get rid of that, as long as there's, I don't know, enough energy in the place where it feels like overall it's supporting you, that might be a niggle that isn't going to go.
100%. And I'm really glad you said that, because the idea that we can delete experiences from our mind or just forget things. I often have clients that tell me, I just want things to be the way that they were before I even heard of dieting. I want things to be like when I was like 14 years old and I wouldn't even think about this stuff anymore, or even younger, like 8 years old. I'm like, oh, that's a tough call, because we can't, we're not a hard drive. We can't forget. So yeah, trying to eliminate these things completely
Mhm.
can be, yeah, dicey. Like in my own relationship with training, for example, the vast majority of it is about being stronger, being able to move my body, being able to keep up with my wife when we go on a hike without dying of exhaustion and then complaining, you know, and then there might be small parts of those training sessions where a couple of exercises go in here and there for particular body parts just because.
Hmm.
And it's, but that's not, whereas that used to be the vast majority of my training sessions and exercise. Now it's like, it's almost just like a little sprinkling on top. Like it's not the whole experience. And that's what the reality of it looks like for me now. And I find that manageable. Some people need to break away from it as much as possible. I've found that I can manage a little bit of it in
Hmm.
there. But if you were to ask me about any point in my life, any terrible experience that I had with food, I can still remember it. I can still remember how I felt. I can still recall it if I want to. And how can I possibly know whether or not those experiences haven't shaped my current beliefs, feelings, life philosophies? How could I know
Mm.
unless we were talking to an alternate universe version of me who'd never had those experiences? So I'm just talking about it in the sense of the absolute black and white sense of expecting ourselves to be able to delete experiences totally to the point where it's like they never happened. Eh,
Hmm.
I would say that for all intents and purposes, we with time and the right work and everything, we can get as close to that as possible, but it will never be like they never happened because we can always recall it.
Agreed. What if somebody has performance goals in mind? So let's say someone's a runner or a cyclist, or even something like boxing, whereby their body weight can have an impact on their performance. So they'll say it's not an aesthetics thing. I'm not trying to chase worthiness or self-esteem in a certain look, but I do want to reduce my body weight through like exercise, through training, through trying to manage my eating at the same time. Do you get people like that come to you, or have you worked with people like that in the past? And how do you think about it?
Yes, I actually work with a few combat athletes. Well, people have come to me who are Thai boxers, MMA athletes, and that's a very real concern for them. They're like, look, my sport actually involves that I manage my weight sometimes. And the two primary things in that situation, three really. First one, on a practical level with food, do your best to eat preemptively if you can, like as much as possible. Don't try and put it off until you're starving. There are no points to be scored by putting it off as long as possible. If you know how much you can eat and still hit that target, eat preemptively if you can. Of course, there are always exceptions to this rule. Some people say that some kind of method of fasting or whatever works for them. That's fine. If that works for them, I'm not their guy. I would say eat preemptively when possible. It goes without saying that the smaller the calorie deficit, the better. It's difficult factoring in training and preparing for an event like a fight, but in general, a smaller calorie deficit over a longer period of time is going to knock you around less than crashing over the course of a few weeks. But most importantly, or equally importantly, but your support network, your life outside of training and dieting, your support network in terms of your relationships, the people in your life, your stress levels, all those things need to be taken care of, and your environment outside of training and diet needs to be as supportive as possible. Because in these terrible moments when you might be in pain, you might be in distress, it might be a bad day, you don't have food to lean on. You don't have that kind of comfort to lean on. And you're going to need a support network that really has your back. It's difficult because everyone who's had experience with calorie restriction, with dietary restriction, especially athletes, have their own experience of how that kind of works best for them. So I'm sometimes hesitant to say do X, Y, Z with food because an athlete that is very self-aware and has a lot of experience will often have tried a bunch of different things and will understand that, okay, A and B didn't work, but C is kind of the way that I can do this that has, the least, damage, the least collateral damage. But I'd put a lot of emphasis outside of those practical points with nutrition on your support network, your relationships, your stress levels outside of training and dieting need to be on point, especially your personal, especially your personal relationships. You need to have people that have your back. You need to be surrounded by good people. Yeah.
And you're welcome to offer out my orange juice tip if that helps anybody else.
Orange juice, you can't make it's an idea. Like 100%, I would not discount it. There is something really satisfying about a glass of fruit juice after a training session. I agree. I think it's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. I think what I appreciate about you, Marcus, is the fact that you can tread this middle ground in what you do, which is just so in alignment with what I try and do with what I'm doing. Because so often people who come in at the personal training level, they're like the gym bros, like you need to do this, you need to do that, the aesthetics, all of that. Or they're at the other end of the spectrum that's going, gosh, you can't even think about these things. Movement should only be intuitive and it should only be joyful and it should be this spontaneous thing. And so finding that middle ground, yeah, I appreciate that there are practitioners out there like you who are doing that. So thank you very much for coming on the channel and sharing your thoughts with us all.
Well, thank you so much. It's always really nice to chat with you, and I've enjoyed being here.
And of course, I'll pop details below about how people can contact you. And as I mentioned at the top, Marcus is now on YouTube. He's just starting out. Go over there, give him some love and support. And in return, he will give you some great content. So that is Strong Not Starving. And thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you on the next video.